everyone, welcome back to Women in Film Reviews. My name is Helen and today we are going to be talking about Ava DuVernay's adaptation of Madeleine L'Engle's classic novel, A Wrinkle in Time. This is the second adaptation of A Wrinkle in Time following a less than stellar television version in 2003. This version, as I mentioned, was directed by Ava DuVernay from a script by Jennifer Lee and a first draft by Jeff Stockwell, and this was released on March 9th, 2018. The production budget of this film was around $103 million, which makes Ava DuVernay the first Black woman to helm a film over $100 million, and it also makes her the second woman overall behind Patty Jenkins, whose Wonder Woman had come out just 9 months prior to this. Upon its release, A Wrinkle in Time opened in second place at the box office behind Black Panther, which, by the way, made that weekend the first where the top two grossing films were both directed by Black directors. Black Panther was, of course, directed by Ryan Coogler, and Wrinkle in Time went on to gross about $132 million. That being said, there was also another $100 million in marketing costs for the film, and it is estimated to have been a financial loss for Disney of around $85 to $100 million. And with a 42% critical rating on Rotten Tomatoes, it is more or less viewed as a failure in the eyes of the company that produced it. Which is a bit unfortunate if you ask me, because there is a lot to talk about with this. In any case, A Wrinkle in Time tells the story of Meg Murray, a young girl who is still grappling with the disappearance of her father 4 years prior due to a science experiment gone wrong. Dr. Murray, as played by Chris Pine, believed that humans could travel anywhere in the universe via the form of tesserating, or traveling via small wrinkles in the fabric of the space-time continuum. When Meg, her younger brother Charles Wallace, and her friend Calvin O'Keefe are visited by three mystical beings known as the Misses, they discovered that Meg's father is in fact alive. He is trapped on the dark planet known as Camazotz, and it is up to Meg to overcome her fears, travel the universe, and to save her father before darkness consumes all. If that description alone sounds like a lot to pack into a 2-hour movie, you would not be alone in that. So before I get into talking about the movie a little bit more in depth, I'd like to discuss my history with the book a little bit. So as I mentioned, it is based on a novel by Madeleine L'Engle, and the book is actually filled with quite a few themes that have to do with religion, be it Christianity. There's some more spiritual aspects of it. There's mentions of Buddhism, Hinduism across the board, but that doesn't change the fact that there are very heavy Christian themes in the book, not as heavy as, say, like the Narnia books, but they are there, and Madeleine L'Engle has had a relatively respected viewpoint in the Christian community for a while. I grew up in the church, and my mom had A Wrinkle in Time as well as the rest of the series, and yes, this is part of a series. I believe it's called the Time Quintet. It's also actually been quite challenged because of some of the more overt religious references, something witchcraft. The same people who really disliked Harry Potter because they taught the children dark magic, apparently, were all over this. The original novel was published in 1962, by the way, so this is a bit of an older book. I read the book when I was in middle school. It is a lot to take in. It is very imaginative, but I quite enjoyed it. I liked Meg as a character. I have seen the 2003 adaptation. I don't remember much from it, except that one, it was very low budge, and two, it just, I don't know, overall it wasn't good. And Madeleine L'Engle didn't really like it either, so I highly recommend that you go look up interviews that she's done over the years about her books. She was a very smart lady, and unfortunately she passed away in 2007. So let's get into it. There were quite a few things, as someone who has read the book, that I actually quite liked about the movie. First of all, the cast is very good. I think that the casting was very on point. They could not have picked a better actress to portray Meg Murray. I really liked Storm Reid in this role. She has such a wonderful range. I mean, I don't really know what else there is to say about it, but we'll talk a little bit more about her character arc as we go on. There was a lot of backlash around the casting / acting choices of Derek McCabe as little Charles Wallace. A lot of people thought he was quite unlikable. To that, I would say he's kind of that way in the book as well. Casting child actors is very hard. It's hit and miss. For me, I think Derek McCabe worked really well in this movie because there is a point where he kind of has to make a turn and be a bit more creepy. And I think for the most part, he does a quite good job. So good for him. The misses were cast quite well as well. Of course, we have Oprah as Mrs. Witch. That's W-H-I-C-H. Mindy Kaling was quite good as Mrs. Who. Reese Witherspoon was okay as Mrs. Whatsit. I did a little bit of research just to refresh myself about what their book personalities were like. And there's a lot of Mrs. Whatsit's character in particular that is more or less changed here. She's very naive in this movie, and I don't know if Reese Witherspoon was very good at it 100% of the time. Again, I think some of it's down to the writing and some of it's down to the acting choices. There's a little bit of Elle Woods sneaking in there. It didn't annoy me the entire time, and I was used to it by the end, and by the end it worked quite well. So there's that. Chris Pine was great as Dr. Murray, Meg's father. He has to have some very serious acting choices, especially later on in the movie. And it's interesting because I don't think I'd ever seen a Chris Pine in a fatherly role before, and I'd quite like to see him in more. He's one of the most underrated actors that we have in this industry, if I'm being honest. I could not stop singing his praises in my Wonder Woman review, if you check that out. Overall, quite good casting. I will say with the kids, I was very pleased to see that Meg and Calvin in particular were not aged up as they were in the television version. They are about 13, 14 years old in the book. In the television version, the actors that played them at least were 18 and 20 years old respectively, so great. I think they aged them up in that version to kind of play up the romance a little bit more, which yes, Meg and Calvin do end up together in later books, but for now, they are just kids. I appreciated that they kept them just kids in this adaptation because we don't need it. The hints of the romance, they are there, but it's very much not at the forefront, and I appreciate that. This is a movie with a lot of heart, I would say. There's a lot going on in Hollywood with having everything be dark and gritty and complicated, and this movie is very complicated, but it has a quote-unquote power of love ending. So did the book, and in my opinion, they really brought it home. The ending was so satisfying to see, even if some of the parts leading up to it were a little bit rocky. And a lot of that is down to Meg and her characterization and the relationships that she has with the other characters, because ultimately, it is her love of her family that saves the day. And that could have been very cheesy, but they handled it quite well. So I have to give them props for that. Of course, Jennifer Lee is no stranger to power of love endings. It works quite well here, much better than in Frozen. The visuals in this film are just absolutely stunning. As I say, this is a hard book to adapt, and a big part of that is just the vast visualizations and the imagination that Madeleine L'Engle's prose enables. And a lot of it doesn't necessarily fit into the cozy, comfy children's fantasy boxes that maybe Lion the Witch in the Wardrobe or Harry Potter, especially nowadays, kind of tick. It is a bit of a mix between sci-fi and fantasy, but oh my goodness, these visuals, they are absolutely stunning. From Uriel, the planet that they first visit, to Camazotz, to just the color palette, the Happy Medium's home. Ava, you outdid yourself here. And Rich McBride, the visual effects supervisor, just, mwah, it was so amazing. It was so good to see. I do often wonder why fantasy films, or children's films at least, are given such big budgets when they don't necessarily need to be a big giant story, but for such a more cerebral story, the visuals are such an important part of it, and I cannot give enough props to Ava and her team for pulling this off. The decision to make Meg a biracial black girl and to include just these wonderful women of color in the form of her and Gugu Mbatha-Raw and Oprah and Mindy Kaling, and all the quotes from non-white people that Mindy Kaling includes throughout the movie. It ranges nationalities, it ranges religions. I can imagine just these little black girls seeing this movie and seeing Meg portrayed the way she is as just this powerful black heroine is just amazing, and I want more of that. We need to see more of that. I wish more people would appreciate the movie for that. I have to say, for all the movie's faults, which we will get into, the moment when Meg finds her father again, it made me cry. She's been away from her father for so long and not knowing when she's going to be able to come back. And as someone who basically left the life that I knew back in Michigan without really knowing when I was going to see my immediate family again, I feel that rush of emotion every time that I see them, and it just got to me. That moment is played so well when Meg and her father embrace, and it is so bittersweet because Meg has also partially failed in her mission in that Charles Wallace is already succumbing to the evil, or the it, that's on Camisats, and it's just a heartbreaking moment, and they nailed it. It was so good. If there's any moment that I needed to be right in this movie, it was that, and amazing. I do appreciate that this is more of a cerebral movie than an action movie. There is a tendency in children's movies based on children's books that don't necessarily have a lot of action or a big battle at the end to kind of shove that in there. And they could have made it like a battle, and Meg has to be a warrior. She does have to be a warrior in this one, but a warrior in a very different sense than taking up a sword and a shield and going to war. She has to be a warrior of love. And I appreciate that this movie more or less dealt with the psychological issues at play here rather than more of the physical ones. I love to see a movie that doesn't necessarily have to be big on action. The visuals are here to serve the imagination. We're not here to have a big giant battle. Normally I would call this section the things I didn't like or things that didn't work. For this movie, I'm going to call this particular section of the video what got lost in translation, because a lot got lost in translation, unfortunately, with this one. As I've said a few times, this is a hard book to adapt. There are a lot of ideas at play. This is more of a cerebral movie, and you have to take a very complicated narrative and make it accessible to the people who are watching this movie, and especially those who have not read the book before. There are a lot of ideas going on, and it doesn't always work. I do have to go into this movie with a caveat, because as far as adaptations of this particular book, Ava did about as good of a job as she could given the circumstances, but of course there are other factors at play. Again, there's a lot of controversy in the religious community about this book. Some of the religious aspects of the book are quite removed in this one. It took me a minute when I was going back and reading the plot summary and some of the religious debate around this. So there's a scene at the very end of the movie where Mrs. Witch talks about some of the warriors that Meg has now joined the ranks of thanks to her mission. And it includes a lot of historical figures such as Maya Angelou and others, and in the book, this passage specifically refers to Jesus Christ and the Buddha as part of these warriors who are defending Earth with the power of love, quote unquote. Now, a lot of religious leaders took issue with those two figures being included. I can see both sides of the debate. We don't want to be elevating some of these human figures to more or less God status, and then there were a lot of people that took issue with Jesus, who is God incarnate, being compared on equal footing with other humans. I don't really want to get into my particular beliefs on that sentiment, but I just wanted to let you guys know that there is a bit of controversy about that bit. Another religious theme that kind of pervades the book is the idea of the power of love, that Meg's love is so powerful. It is kind of derived from the biblical notion that Jesus came to earth and loved us even though we didn't necessarily deserve his everlasting and unchanging love for us, and he died and sacrificed himself on the cross for us, and that love was overpowering and all-powerful. So that is a bit of a theme that comes through the book. The power of love is still a very important aspect of the movie, but it's not necessarily given the same religious treatment, I would say, on that front. So I don't necessarily think that removing a lot of the literary religious aspects of the book hurt the movie in any sense, but maybe might have added a bit more if it were left in. That's just my opinion. Speaking of things left out and things left in, this movie has quite a few pacing issues. Because this is a very cerebral movie, it needs quite a bit of setup. We need to know the type of research that Dr. Murray and, well, Dr. Murray, Meg's parents, were doing. We need to know how people can tesser over the wrinkles of time. The whole title comes down to the fact that, like, what if you could, like, fold bits of the universe and travel through it? We need to set that up. We need to set up the home life. We need to set up Mrs. Which, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. What's-It. There's a lot of setup going on. I am not opposed to a slow burn of a movie, but I think a few aspects that were left out maybe could have helped that a bit better. But I get it. You've only got 2 hours and you have to tell this movie in as cohesive a way as possible. So I get it. I get it. One thing I cannot understand is the removal of the scene in the book with Aunt Beast. In the movie, as Charles Wallace is taking Meg, Calvin, and Dr. Murray to go see it after he's been possessed, Dr. Murray and Calvin tesser away and Meg stays to try to change him. In the book, all 3 of them tesser away, and Meg is actually paralyzed because the tesser hurts so much for her. And they end up on this other planet with this creature with tentacles and 4 arms that they call Aunt Beast, and she heals Meg. And it's a moment to regroup, and it's kind of like the lowest low before the hero goes back to fight the winning battle. I understand to an extent why this scene was left out, because as visually stunning as this movie is, there are a lot of abstract concepts that they got in there. I can understand not wanting to mess with trying to create Aunt Beast as she's in the book. That being said, they still should have found a way to kind of have the 3 of them go somewhere else, regroup, and then Meg come back by herself to save Charles Wallace, because it felt like too quick of a jump. I do still like the ending. I do still think it kind of works, but I feel like the very beginning of the movie is just, it's a very slow burn, and all of a sudden at the end, it's settled quite quickly. I think the stakes would have been way more visible if we had left that bit in, but I understand why they decided to leave it out. I wish this movie had more time to devote to that kind of thing. It would have been way more satisfying to watch Meg come back from this injury and make the decision to say, nope, I need to go by myself and I need to go save Charles Wallace. And the ending is still satisfying, I will say. It's still satisfying, but it felt like they were missing that piece. I mentioned the tendency to make children's books action movies. Disney in particular has a history of this. Chronicles of Narnia, you can kind of get away with it because there's a battle in the book, granted one that Lucy and Susan see the aftermath of, that we don't actually see, but they can get away with it, and for the most part, in that one, worked quite well. Bridge to Terabithia is a Disney adaptation that I take a lot of issue with. One, because I love my dear Catherine Patterson, and I've met her in person, and she is delightful and lovely, and Bridge to Terabithia is just, I put that on the level of Wrinkle in Time for me. And Disney just kind of messed up the adaptation. Again, it's a very thought-provoking, it's not a fantasy book, and yet they decided to make the fantasy elements real in the movie. That's all a discussion for another day, but my point being, Disney has a history of this. Wrinkle in Time, it didn't necessarily fall into this trap all the way, but there are some sequences, such as the flying sequence in Uriel, the first bit of sequence when we get onto Camazotz, that are a little more action heavy than I would have liked them to be. Here's my feeling. This movie should have been made with this budget either 10 years prior, when they were making things like Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe that were big and they made changes, but more or less did not have like as much studio interference at the top, or they should have made this a couple years later as a mini series on Disney Plus. Disney, of course, is known for interfering at the top, which is why their movies tend to feel a lot more corporate, be it the live action remakes, the Star Wars movies, the Marvel movies, or the other ones that they make, because those are the three main categories that they are interested in right now. Unfortunately, I feel Ava's personal touch on this movie, but I do feel the corporate hand at the top. Another issue, I'm not sure that making this adaptation contemporaneous to the day it was released was the best idea. The novel was released in the 60s, and both adaptations of A Wrinkle in Time, this one and the 2003 one, have more or less brought the setting up to modern times. I, for one, would love to see an adaptation of Wrinkle in Time that is set in the late 50s, early 60s, when Madeleine L'Engle was writing and publishing these books. That's not to say that a adaptation set in the 60s couldn't be racially diverse. In fact, I would actually really love to see that version. But I really wish that we could take children's books and not have to worry about whether teens can relate to them or not. Again, the two examples I mentioned prior, there was talk before Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was put into production about maybe setting it in modern times, but thankfully the producers, directors, everyone involved was like, no, this story works because of the time period that it's set in. And they get around the fact that we are now distant from the war, as children in the 1950s probably wouldn't have been. And they put in a scene at the beginning with the Blitz to set this firmly in the 1940s and to set up the stakes and to let kids today know, who are definitely not alive when that happened, what these kids would have gone through. I think that Wrinkle in Time, if it had been set in the 60s, in the film anyways, maybe could have gotten around that, but there's a lot of other setup that needs to happen. I get it. And it's also important, again, for young Black girls today to see a young Black girl in the present, like themselves, be this amazing, strong character. Like I said last time with Emma, I would like to see other different adaptations and interpretations of the story. So there's that. I think the biggest aspect that led to this particular movie's downfall is the marketing. This is very much, as you're probably aware by now in this video, not a movie that fits into any one particular box, and especially not into the children's fantasy box that has been popular for about 20 years now, thanks to J.K. Rowling and Harry Potter. So this movie was going to be a hard sell in the first place. It is based on a popular book, but it's not a book that was published within the last 2 decades. It's not a book that had a lot of press in the last couple decades, as say like Harry Potter or Percy Jackson, or even The Golden Compass to some extent. So you kind of wonder, who are you going for? Do you market to the Christian audience by being like, oh yes, this Christian book that you guys, have such a high regard? Or are you worried about the controversy that I mentioned earlier? Do you market this to a non-secular audience? How do you market this really abstract story to an audience that is not gonna have any idea what's happening, and how do you do that throughout? Especially for a company that has specific molds in the kinds of films that they're making nowadays. The fact that this was greenlit, honest to God, was a bit surprising. A good surprise, but surprising. They really did not care about this movie. They gave it a $100 million budget, but they really didn't care about it. Sorry, the corporate heads at the top, Ava DuVernay and Jennifer Lee and everyone else involved, was very dedicated to this movie, and it shows. There's a lot of passion behind it. It's not a perfect movie by any means, but it's still enjoyable, and it still holds a special place in my heart. And my husband, who had never read the book and had only seen the movie for the first time with me yesterday, he quite enjoyed it. But again, we're adults. We are not children whose butts you're trying to get in seats. It is a bit of a conundrum, but I think that they could have marketed this better. So, that being said, legacy. Let's talk about this film's legacy, because it has one, or at least I want it to. As I say, it is very telling that this was the only original feature film on the Walt Disney Company slate in 2018, and even then, this is an adaptation. This is a company that is interested in only pre-existing properties, particularly pre-existing properties that, one, they own, and two, have done very, very, very well for them in the past. This and Artemis Fowl kind of suffered for it. Artemis Fowl suffered far worse, obviously, but this feels like they saw that this was a popular book, that they should probably get the rights on it. They've had the rights for nearly 2 decades now, and I feel like no one actually read it. I feel like another film company could have done a good adaptation of it, but because we have to fit the Disney brand, this is what we get. It's very indicative of the Disney company's direction. I talk a little bit more about that in the Captain Marvel review. As I say, there are other children's adaptations being made by other studios that aren't feature films. They're TV series, miniseries. Netflix did a really good job with Series of Unfortunate Events, which is a book series that I quite enjoyed as a kid. The movie version that we got in 2004 was not very good in my opinion, but we are making our way through the TV series, and I quite enjoy it, and they got the tone right. Same thing with His Dark Materials. Bad feature adaptation, give it another go as a miniseries. This is of course a collaboration between BBC and HBO. This is the children's series essentially that got like top billing on BBC One when it was in its first run. And even The Chronicles of Narnia, which I love dearly and whose first 2 movie adaptations at least I quite enjoy, is getting a second life on Netflix. Point being, a lot of books that got feature film adaptations that weren't that great are getting second life as TV series, and I kind of wonder if they had waited just maybe a year or 2 longer to make A Wrinkle in Time as a miniseries for Disney+. Ava could still be involved, the cast could still be involved, but maybe we would have had more time to explore a lot of the abstract concepts. Again, this is a film that has a wonderful young black heroine as its lead, and it's so powerful to see that on screen, and it's so important for young black girls to be able to see themselves in Meg. Since A Wrinkle in Time has come out, more women have been given creative control of big box office films. That includes Kathy Yan for Birds of Prey and Nia DaCosta, who is going to helm the upcoming Captain Marvel 2. That being said, women overall aren't being given that many big budget pictures, so hopefully that will change in the future. And hopefully we can see more women taking on projects that aren't necessarily in the superhero genre, but do have these types of budgets. This is one of the most thought-provoking children's films that Disney has put out. That being said, the low critical and box office reception leaves me to think that Disney probably won't be investing in many more of these, unfortunately. Ava DuVernay, of course, has continued to do stellar work since this movie's release, but in television. Of course, her film The 13th was nominated for Best Documentary. I think it should have won. My main takeaway when it comes to A Wrinkle in Time is that perhaps it's true that this novel is unfilmable, and perhaps this is a story that was best suited to its original medium in prose. but this is still a quite good adaptation despite some of its flaws. In any case, go ahead and give Wrinkle in Time a watch or a rewatch. I think you might find some things you like. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review. Let me know about some of your favorite childhood books and adaptations in the comments. I would love to get some new reading material. If you liked this video, you can subscribe below and watch some of my previous reviews. You can also check out my second channel, Helen, where I make vlogs every so often. I have a couple things I'd like to get done in the next couple weeks. Now is also a great time to become a patron of mine at patreon.com/HelenGrotehuis. And I say that because I have just uploaded the first of the patron-exclusive monthly movie commentaries. This month, Tim and I watched Phineas and Ferb Across the Second Dimension and had a really great time. And if you become one of my £5 patrons, you'll have access to that, as well as some polls and some exclusive updates. Be sure to check out my website, helen-grotehuis.com, to see all of my creative output in one place. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook to see what I get up to when I'm not filming. Thanks again so much for watching. Remember to keep living awesome lives, and I will see you back here in 2 weeks for another Women in Film review. Bye, guys.